In the lead up to the election, throughout the campaign, the Biden campaign as surrogates, they talked a lot about how important the black vote was to them, how they needed turnout to be there, and what they felt they were doing to earn that vote. Well, now Joe Biden has won. In less than 2 months, he's going to be president. So what comes now? What will they actually do now that they're going to be in charge? And joining us now to break down some of these possibilities is civil rights attorney Charles Coleman Jr. Welcome to the Damage Report.
How you doing, John? Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Very glad to have you on. So, before we jump into some of the specifics, what did you think about the fact that Biden did win? I know that we're still in the aftermath of it, and the legal efforts are still ongoing. But what did you think about the fact that Trump had been so rejected?
Well, I think that a lot of it, quite frankly, John, had more to do with coronavirus than anything else. If I'm being completely honest, I think that, quite frankly, the Biden campaign had a little bit of luck on their side in that they had a terrible opponent in Donald Trump, who was, quite frankly, able to energize the opposition's base more than he was to galvanize his own base. And I think that, beyond what we saw from the economy and business before coronavirus, the mishandling of that situation was so egregious, it was so bad, that I think that Americans who were sort of moderate or consider themselves apolitical were just motivated to go out to the polls and vote, because we find ourselves in such a terrible predicament now because of that void in leadership. So I think that Joe Biden had a lot of good things working for him in his favor that necessarily weren't about Joe Biden. I think there were a lot of people who voted against Donald Trump and did not vote for Joe Biden, but nevertheless, he is the victor now, and he has the stage, so to speak, and it's his to do with it as he pleases.
Interesting. So specifically for black voters, we still don't know exactly how all of the numbers are going to work out, but it seems like black voter turnout was fairly high, although it looks like Donald Trump might have done a little bit better in that community than he did back the last time. What did you think about the way Biden campaigned, the promises he made, things that he focused on in terms of what his agenda was like? How did he make the case?
A lot of it remains to be seen. I mean, I think that he said what he needed to say in terms of not getting it wrong. I don't necessarily know that means he got it right. I think that he basically needed to distinguish himself from Donald Trump from the standpoint of Trump's rhetoric having been very harmful to black people in America, and arguably having put black people in America in harm's way. And so because of that, what he needed to do, just from a rhetoric standpoint, was make himself different. And he did a good job of that. He did a good job of basically saying, I am rejecting this hate speech. I am rejecting this rhetoric that threatens to marginalize you all as a community even further than you've already been marginalized. Now, policy-wise is where I think I, as well as many others, have some serious, because when it comes to policy, yes, Biden did release his Lift Every Voice plan, and it was extensive in terms of what he plans to do for the black community. But if you read between the lines, if you look at it with a fine-tooth comb, you can kind of see that there are some issues with that plan. And I think that that's where many of us are now. We're sort of waiting to see exactly whether the proof is in the pudding when you look at policy, when you look at what he's actually going to do for foundational black Americans here in America.
And look, we still don't know exactly what the rest of government is going to look like once he becomes president. Depending on how those primary or those runoff elections in Georgia go, Mitch McConnell could still be in charge in the Senate, right, which wouldn't mean that Biden couldn't do anything, but it would make it a little bit easier. If he wasn't really prioritizing these things, a hostile Senate would make it a little bit easier to say, what can I do? Like, they're not going to pass any big legislation. If we do have Mitch McConnell, how much does that change your expectations or your hopes for what Biden might be able to or willing to accomplish?
Well, here's the thing about that, John. Joe Biden has to figure that out. And I'll tell you why. He has about 18 months. He and Kamala Harris have about 18 months, give or take, before we get to the point of midterms. And then when we start getting to the point of midterms, we're naturally going to be looking at what's going to happen in 2024. So he has a very short window to figure that out. And I would hope that he and his policy team have already begun to think about alternative routes to get things done, be it by way of executive order, be it by way of working with Congress and the leadership there with regard to Speaker Pelosi and other things. so that we don't end up relying on Mitch McConnell. But I do want to point something out. I thought it was very telling early on in the primary season. I recall Joe Biden actually said that he was the candidate who was best positioned to flip the Senate and turn it blue. And I thought that was a really strong selling point. I thought that actually it was an understated selling point that he should have used more often than he actually did. Now, of course, this was pre-corona. This was pre sort of like the hybrid campaign season that we ended up seeing. So it's very likely that he didn't get an opportunity to sort of drive that point home the way that he thought that it would resonate with Democratic voters. Nevertheless, now that we're here, he's got to figure that out. I don't necessarily know that Mitch McConnell, being the Senate Majority Leader, ends up getting him a total pass not to do anything. I mean, Mitch McConnell has been in office. He had a tough race as an incumbent. It was still likely that he was going to win that race. He did, and it's very possible that seat that Raphael Warnock in Georgia doesn't win his race. It's possible that there's voter backlash from GOP voters in the state of Georgia. We just really don't know what's going to happen. So my point being, it's up to Joe Biden to sort of have a plan and have a strategy, and it's not going to be enough for black voters for him to be able to say, I didn't have a Senate majority. There was nothing I could do. We're not going to go for that.
We don't know exactly what his cabinet is going to look like, because even that potentially has to run up against Mitch McConnell. But he's been making some of his picks for people he wants to have in his team, and everybody's watching it to see what signals is he sending with the people that he's choosing to elevate. What have you thought of the picks that you've seen so far?
I think everything that I've seen, particularly looking at his financial team and the team around the economy, has been something that really wants to mirror what the face of the Democratic Party is supposed to look like. I mean, it's been hallmarked by the theme of inclusion. We've seen tons of women, we've seen tons of ethnic minorities who've been a part of both policy as well as planning in terms of the transition, as well as, like I said, his economic team is probably the most indicative of that. You have folks who are coming from private industry, having been stars there. You have folks who have decorated careers in public service and government, so you see that as well. And so I think what you are going to see, or what you should expect to see, is an administration that reflects the diversity of thought and ideas that exist that the Democratic Party sort of hangs its hat on. What that means in actual reality remains to be seen. I mean, I think that the optics and the symbolism are pointing toward the right direction, but we have to judge Joe Biden, and as we would any president, by his results. I don't think that we're at a point anymore where we can sort of look at the face cards, if you will, of who's being put in certain positions and just have that be enough. Representation matters, but at the end of the day, results are going to be paramount.
Yeah, and finally, I've had activists and organizers that focus on a few different areas, like the environment, immigration, that obviously they have big expectations for what could potentially be done with legislation. But they also know there's quite a few things that can be done almost instantly solely by Joe Biden via executive orders. They could be done on day one. Are there any things like that you're hopeful for, that you're looking out for?
So, for me, I'm a civil rights attorney and a diversity and inclusion practitioner. I work with businesses, I work with government agencies around diversity and inclusion. It was a crushing blow to have Donald Trump sign an executive order which basically froze all federal funds that would cover diversity and inclusion trainings and programs for federal agencies. So that for me is a big one that off the top, I would like to see, sort of by way of executive order, him reversing that, freeing up those funds, and continuing a much needed conversation in a variety of sectors around diversity, inclusion, and race equity. I think there's also something that he can do. I've talked about this publicly before. I talked about it on the Young Turks before, that being the notion of qualified immunity. He can't necessarily do anything to abolish the doctrine of qualified immunity by way of executive order or where he sits. However, what I do think that he has is the power of his bully pulpit at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I think it's really important that he use it. If you're going to talk about criminal justice reform, if you're going to talk about dismantling systemic inequity, you have to sort of be willing to speak on these topics. And I know that early in the campaign season, many people, including myself, were disappointed to find that he wasn't willing to talk about getting rid of qualified immunity. And I feel like that's one of the things that he needs to step out in front of and change if he's going to change people's minds about his record on criminal justice in America.
Exactly. And And coming off of this year, there's no excuse not to have something like that be a part of your focus. And if you don't, it seems almost like you're gambling that all of that social movement and energy and passion will actually just go away if Trump goes away. And that seems like a risky gamble if you want the midterms to go the Democrats' way.
No, and John, you're absolutely right. I know we're short on time, but you're absolutely right. It's not just a gamble for Joe Biden. It's a selfish gamble in that the people who are going to pay the price for that are Democratic, candidates. Yeah, the party is going to be the one who ends up paying the price for that sort of gamble, because at the end of the day, whether Joe Biden does 2 terms, whether he does 1 term, the record, the legacy of what he establishes, it keeps going during these first 2 years in office leading up to midterms are really going to set the tone for the 2024 presidential election. So he has to think a lot bigger rather than his own legacy. He has to think about what kind of position is a gamble like that going to put my party in, because it really would subject them to a lot of angry voters.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Charles Coleman Jr., thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, John.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.